Hey, what's up everyone? Emperor Cow here, and it's been a while. I recently had a chance to spend quite some time on the TGS Build of DOA6, and I thought I would share my experience with you all, as I feel like I might be able to answer a lot of the questions and skepticism that many, including myself, had regarding the overall changes made to the game, and whether it's enough to make it feel like a true sequel and not just an upgrade to DOA5. So let's start off with the visuals. The first thing that caught my eye about the game is how absolutely stunning it looks. DOA5 already still looks better than most games out there, and to think that it could be topped off like this is just absolutely mind-blowing. I'm going to geek out a little bit here. I don't know how, but they managed to make Kasumi look even prettier than she already was. The attention to detail, like bruises, sweating, tearing of clothes, it all adds up to the overall beauty of the game. But one thing that caught my eye more than anything was how vibrant the colors were compared to DOA5. It actually makes DOA5 look almost depressing. Now let's get down to the technical stuff. Loss of stagger escape and reduced stun duration. This is probably one of the first things any long-standing DOA5 player will notice. To a veteran DOA player, losing stagger escape will initially seem like a huge deal since it was a major defensive tool and the usually safer option as opposed to holding in stun. I still found myself frantically shaking my controller to get out of stun whenever I got hit. What can I say? Old habits die hard. But once you get used to it being gone, you'll realize that the meta hasn't really changed much, particularly because the stun duration has been decreased. So now, instead of staggering into block or holding in stun, the defensive mix-up in stun has simply become doing nothing into block or holding in stun. For the attacker playing at a high level, however, nothing has changed, as the offensive is simply the same. You either put in another attack with the risk of getting held, wait for the impulse hold and get a high counter throw, or go for an offensive hold or a throw versus someone that's used to doing nothing and like to stagger. However, because of the decreased stun duration, the attacker really has to commit to the follow-up now. The concept of what qualifies as a combo is far more clear-cut now, since the follow-up either connects or it doesn't. I think this makes it a lot easier to understand for both beginners and pros alike. This is probably the main reason behind doing all this in the first place. The ability to stagger was really a huge dividing gap between players, and to this day almost looked at as secret tech when playing with a beginner that kept asking, "Hey, how come my combos aren't working on you?" I just want to mention that holding in stun still functions the same, and is still a very dangerous thing to do, as it increases the stun duration and allows for things that usually don't qualify as a combo to be comboed into each other. Loss of critical burst, reduced threshold, and standardized launch heights. In DOA5, a lot of the game plan revolved around how deep you can get someone into stun in order to score a critical burst or a level 3 launch height for a devastating juggle. This whole game plan is gone now, and the rules are reverted back to how they were in the DOA2 and DOA3 days. When first playing the game, I think DOA5 players will struggle quite a bit in this particular area, as they would be too invested in the ground game for a cash out that no longer exists. I also noticed myself and other players going beyond the threshold quite a bit at first, which led to inevitable knockdowns or threshold launches from moves that wouldn't normally cause a launch, till we got the hang of it being reduced and actually started to play DOA6 instead of DOA5. Don't get me wrong, the stun game is still very viable and there are still relatively safe ways to extend stun either by sit-down stuns, limbo stuns, or the newly introduced Fatal Rush. However, opting for an early launch is now far more attractive since the launch height is standardized now, making it the safer option for guaranteed damage. Again, I think the standardization of launch heights is another approach the team is taking to make the game easier to understand, as there was no indicator before to distinguish between the different launch height levels, except maybe threshold height when the critical stun sign goes red. The fixed height makes the juggles cleaner and far more clear-cut. Just for the record, character weight classes still seem intact. Now let's talk about the movement. Movement in DOA6 has received a significant buff. It seems that free stepping will play a more valuable role in the neutral game than before. Linear attacks seem to miss their mark more often if the opponent correctly evades them, leaving the attacker more open to a punish. This change isn't as drastic as Soul Calibur's 8-way run, but it is noticeable. Sidestepping in particular seems to travel a lot more now. In many instances in the Colosseum stage, I found myself punishing or being punished by a sidestep attack which led to hitting the opponent into a rope bounce and a guaranteed combo from behind. Another use for the new sidestep travel was that it seemed to function as a really good shut up move versus characters coming in from far away with a long range attack. Now let's talk about this whole S button and meter business. I'm sure most of you are concerned about this whole S button business and what impact it has on the game and whether it's too invasive. Well, after 3 days of playing the game, I can confidently say that no, it is not. In fact, I think it's awesome. For those who don't yet know, the S button is simply a macro of H plus P plus K, and is the button used for all the new gimmicks. Pressing up and down an S is the new universal sidestep command. Pressing it again during sidestep will give you the Sidestep Attack. However, unlike DOA5, the Sidestep Attack this time around only functions as a get off me mechanic and not as a stun starter. It does, however, serve as a valuable tool to trigger some stage situations as I mentioned earlier. Pressing a neutral S will trigger the first attack in the Fatal Rush chain. The Fatal Rush chain is a 4-hit combo done by pressing S, 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 all of which are unholdable by a conventional hold with the exception of the first attack, as the opponent is placed in a new type of stun called Fatal Stun. Fatal Rush always starts as a high attack, is unsafe on block, and cannot be followed up on whiff or on block. We all know this. But is it invasive? Does it take away from the character individuality as most of us feared? I don't really think so. First of all, it's a high attack. It's holdable, crushable, easily whiffable by a low hold, and from the characters I've tried, hardly has any range to bait it from far away. Secondly, it hardly does any worthwhile damage on its own. Thirdly, meter builds up quite quickly in this game to the point that there's almost always enough meter to stop it with a break hold, which is the only way to get out of a fatal stun. So it might not be worth it all the time as people might think, which brings me to the next new mechanic. Pressing back an S will give you a break hold, which is a universal hold that beats out all heights. It costs half a meter and it doesn't do any damage, but it serves as a situation reset tool. This was probably one of my biggest worries going into DOA6, but I soon learned to love this mechanic and the reasoning behind it. As I mentioned earlier, it is the only defensive tool in Fatal Stun, but it is also a valuable asset to have when you're in a tight situation, as it would beat out all strike options. I particularly found it useful when my life was low and my opponent was going for a wake-up attack, or when I was put in a crazy mix-up by Helena going into Bokuho stance, or Honoka going into her newly buffed Burning Soul stance. Having that break hold in those situations was great. It is, however, as vulnerable as a regular hold to high counter throws, so be careful. It is also worth mentioning that break hold does not beat Fatal Rush when it is used as a juggle, obviously. Also, break hold does not get you out of situations that are truly guaranteed, such as sit-down stuns, limbo stuns, getting hit from behind, or stage danger zones. So there are still really deadly, truly guaranteed combos without the cost of meter. But again, is this mechanic invasive? Is it broken? Hardly, because it costs meter, and meter management is really valuable in this game, which brings us to the next point. Pressing forward an S will give you a break blow. This mechanic costs a whole meter and can be done either raw or automatically replaces the last hit of a Fatal Rush, be it on the ground or during a juggle. Unlike power blows in DOA 5, this new mechanic functions as a sabaki that beats out any high or mid strikes, so it can be used both defensively and offensively. However, being a sabaki, this means it has hold frames in its startup, making it vulnerable to high counter throw, so be careful. It also loses clean to low strikes, which is something to bear in mind when an opponent has a full meter and is waiting to stuff your attacks. Another property of the break blow is the break blow cancel. This is done by pressing H after the break blow hits. Think of it as an FADC in Street Fighter 4 when you spend your meter to further extend your combo. How does it come into play? Well, as I mentioned earlier, landing a Fatal Rush will put your opponent in a Fatal Stun, which they cannot get out of except via break hold. This means that you can opt for an S, SS, or SSS into a semi-guaranteed launcher to further extend your combo, depending on the character. If your launch is high enough, you can even use your Fatal Rush for a guaranteed SSSS combo. And if you had a full meter, you can end with a guaranteed break blow. Here's where things get interesting. If you choose to do a break blow cancel at that point, then the opponent is placed again in Fatal Stun state and is vulnerable again to another combo extension via launcher. However, you need to be careful when doing this, as the opponent is back on their feet and can punish that relaunch with a break hold if they have the meter. Meter management is really important and is actually super fun, because if you go crazy and land a monster combo by burning that whole meter, you better make sure it gives you that round, otherwise you're not gonna have any defensive options for a while should you get hit with a Fatal Rush. On the other hand, you can abuse situations where break hold is needed and drain your opponent's meter till he no longer has any defensive options, then go for the monster combo. Regarding the ground game, it seems that the whole force tech gimmick has been taken away. At first I thought this was a major setback, but as I started to get used to what DOA6 was about and how aggressive it can get, particularly with the new Fatal Rush system and the increased emphasis on stage utilization, I started to see why they opted to nerf the ground game. Simply put, it would have been too much. The game is already crazy and has a lot to offer in terms of damage and pressure. So having the situation reset after a knockdown made sense for both sides to take a little breather. For the record, it was still possible to beat out wake-up kicks clean by certain moves just like before. When it comes to stages, simply put, DOA6's stages are insane. Positioning and stage utilization is far more important than ever before. Almost every corner has something going on that can lead to a combo extension. In some situations, it might be guaranteed, like explosions or breakable objects, and in others, it can open up a mix-up situation like ropes or being thrown back into the fight by the cheering crowd in the throwdown stage. Because of the way the combo system and the characters have been redesigned, you'll notice that almost every character can now carry you all the way to the edges of the stage. So you really need to know what to do if you want to get that guaranteed damage. This happens so often now that you'll forget Critical Burst even existed. When it comes to the characters, for the most part, the characters' movesets have been preserved from DOA 5, with a few tweaks here and there for each character, focusing mainly on increasing their mix-up options. I think this is mainly to play on the fact that you now have a universal hold option with break hold that you can use when in a pinch. One thing I noticed while playing was that the character's strength will now most likely be defined by how much they can carry you to the edge of the stage and how much they can capitalize on the situation when they do. At first glance, I felt that the ninjas, particularly Ayane, as well as maybe Diego, were really good at this. But as I came to understand the game's new mechanics and the changes done to the characters, it seems that almost everyone has the ability to do this. It's just a matter of figuring out how. Honestly, the game feels absolutely great. I never thought they could top DOA 5's mechanics in my mind, but they did it. The matches are fast-paced, and it feels fresh and new with just the right amount of old-school DOA 2, DOA 3 neutral game. The extra layer of strategy with the new meter system is a lot of fun, and it doesn't break the flow of the game at all. Plus, the game is just so pretty. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I don't think I can play DOA 5 anymore. DOA 6 is just that much better. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, favorite, and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys with more DOA 6 content in the future, so stay tuned. This is Emperor Cow signing off.